Thank you for joining us for Future-Proofing Your Supply Chain, Risk Management, and Crisis Response. We'd like to thank our partners over at the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Forum and International Business Forum for being a part of this program today and for sponsoring these forums. So we'd like to thank Baker McKenzie, Molex, MXD, and Uptake for all of their support. And to get us started, I'm going to hand things over to one of our co-chairs of the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Forum, Chandra Brown, for some opening comments.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual joint forum event, Future-Proofing Your Supply Chain, Risk Management and Crisis Response. Now, this event, as what she said, is co-hosted by both the Manufacturing and Supply Chain Forum and the International Business Forum. I am Chandra Brown. I'm the CEO of MXD, which is the National Digital Manufacturing Institute. And I am one of 3 co-chairs of the Executives Club Manufacturing and Supply Chain Forum. So you also hear from my colleagues, Brad Keywell from Uptake and Barry McGoldrick from Molex. I would also like to thank the chair of the International Business Forum, David Maliband, for collaborating with us on this absolutely critical topic. So I am very excited to welcome you for this timely discussion, right? Lots of things happening on supply chain and supply chain security in this modern world. You know, beyond all the obvious challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been numerous issues for supply chain leaders to navigate. From, we know this, shortages of parts to cybersecurity breaches, natural disasters, labor insecurity. Okay, there is a lot for us to cover today. To give you a sense of scale, in 2020, McKinsey & Company said aerospace manufacturers had an average of 12,000 suppliers in their supply chains. Automakers have over 18,000 in theirs. So there's a lot going on. For us at MXD, we have several R&D projects with our members to help U.S. manufacturers get better visibility into their supply chains. We're working on things like supply chain risk alert, which uses different sources of data like weather, transportation, logistics, and risk to create an alert system using AI and algorithms to give you advance notice of a pending supply chain disruption. And we're also working on a wide variety of cybersecurity issues because we know, in particular, with our small and medium-sized manufacturers across the United States, we need to help protect them. Supply chains are often the weakest link there. So every company and organization will bring its own perspective today, and I encourage you to be active in the chat. Submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box, and we will get to audience questions in the latter half of this program. So thanks again to all of you for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers who are going to share some great insights and stories with us. And I'm going to turn things over to one of my co-chairs, Barry, to introduce our wonderful world and panel of speakers. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Chandra. Hi, everybody. My name is Barry McGoldrick. I'm the Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer at Molex. And I'm pleased to be the co-chair of the manufacturing and, sorry folks, I lost my script. The Manufacturing and Supply Chain Forum at the Executive Club. Very excited for today's discussion and to provide introductions for our esteemed panelists. First up, we have Craig Hatcher. Craig is the Senior Director. Craig is the Senior Director of Commodity Management within the Global Operations team at Shure, where he has global responsibility for all for direct and indirect spend, as well as supplier relationships. In addition to these responsibilities, Greg also heads up the Shure's make-buy evaluation efforts, operational acquisition activities, and key supply chain evolution initiatives. Next, we have Lou Longo. Lou is the leader of Plant Moran's international consulting team. He helps clients increase their operational efficiency and grow businesses across borders through strategic expansions. He was instrumental in helping Plant Moran open offices in Shanghai in China, Monterrey in Mexico, and Mumbai in India, and his international experience led to a federal appointment to the District Export Council. Anissa Mutana is the CEO, president, and co-owner of Pioneer Service, Inc., a contract manufacturer specializing in CNC Swiss machinery, CNC turning, and centerless grinding services for North America. In 1993, she took the opportunity to run a small, struggling company and transform it into a thriving organization that serves multiple industries. Moyi Shirazi is the principal economist in the Chicago office of Baker McKinsey. As an economist, he focuses on transfer pricing and providing his clients with economic analysis and valuations that assist them in planning and supporting business reorganizations, as well as establishing and documenting global transfer prices. And finally, my good friend Chris Armbuster is today's moderator. Chris is a leadership partner for Gartner Supply Chain Practice. As an accomplished Fortune 500 supply chain executive, he leverages more than 25 years of high-tech industry experience to help organizations achieve their full operating potential. Prior to joining Gartner, he led large-scale business transformations, digital initiatives, and end-to-end supply chain strategy at global organizations, including Motorola, Lucent Technologies, and AT&T. I'm really excited to have Chris here. I work with him quite a bit, and he does a great job. So finally, just want to welcome and thank all of you, to all of our panelists. We're in for a great discussion today. So without any further ado, I will turn things over to Chris.
Okay, great. And thank you so much, Barry. Let's dive in. Good morning, everyone. Anissa and Greg, we'll go to you guys first. You know, COVID-19 has obviously been one of the most unprecedented global supply chain disruptions of all time. Can you tell us a bit about the ripple effects that businesses are still dealing with today?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So I chuckle when you say ripple effects because for us, it was more of an aftershock from an earthquake. But nonetheless, I can attest to contract manufacturers and manufacturers that belong to the associations I belong to that our pains are very similar, if not identical. And I would say that we're very grateful that business has come back and we are at pre-COVID numbers. So on one hand, it's a great place to be in, and things are looking very promising. But then our vendors, our supply chain, whether it be raw material or outside processing or tooling, the lead time that they're providing us, you know, even as early or late first quarter, early second quarter, has just been extremely painful. And I know I speak the voice of many that are feeling the same pain that I'm feeling. So I would say that that would be our number one issue right now. And then also, like, you know, we understand our suppliers and the challenges they're facing because we're facing the same challenges. And that would be, you know, some of our production workers that have left during the COVID time, you know, either their families haven't been vaccinated or they're having problems with childcare and aren't able to come back. And so that has been a challenge, to say the least. And I think, you know, and I'm sure many will agree, is that we're competing with their unemployment checks. And so that's becoming, you know, the biggest, I think, the aftershock of all is that, you know, not having the support there to really bring back the team and bring back what we had pre-COVID on the production end. So it's trickling down between, you know, our customers to us, to our supply chain. And so we're all feeling it right now.
Yeah. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to echo a lot of what Anissa has said, I mean, it's been an amazing time. Having been in supply chain for a long time, there has never been a period like this, with so many opposing forces happening at once. Of course, COVID, and then look at the handful of other events that happened all at the exact same time. We look at transportation disruption. We look at wildfires, earthquakes. You know, I think governmental regulations in various countries limiting opportunities. And so it is really, you know, I think it's a widely used cliche, but it is truly a perfect storm of events hitting at once. I think what that does is it highlights the importance of flexibility. I think where historic supply chains may have been more focused on efficiency, I think the importance of flexibility as well is really brought to the forefront. And so, I think that it also highlights from an overall business standpoint, the importance of diversification. Our business focuses on, sound, audio. You think about pro events. When concerts go away, there's not a lot of need for a microphone when people aren't getting together in groups. But I think because we had a diversified product portfolio, that allowed us to weather the storm with work from home products as well, and conferencing products. And so I think that that's really a key focus, and I guess a message to a lot of the businesses there. To echo off of, again, Anissa's comments, the global semiconductor shortage, having been in electronics for the last 20 plus years, is something that is astounding. To think we've been in it for just over 6+ months, and we have a potential another 12 to 18 is really just hard to wrap your head around. There is no supply chain model that is made to accommodate that type of situation. If we were holding 18 months of buffer inventory, shame on us. How do you survive that, right? That just is not something that occurs. And so understanding how to weather these situations, having some really difficult internal conversations about how to support this going forward is where you quickly pivot to. I think we saw going back 2-3 years ago, a disruption in the passive electronic market. There's more substitutes in that world, and that seemed revolutionary. Now we're in the active market. There are not as many substitutes, and if there are, they take a lot of redesign efforts, and those can be arduous to say the least. So this is going to be a really interesting time for anybody who requires those types of components. And then in general, cost of everything we buy is going up, and so that is really forcing everyone to evaluate how you buy, what to do when those increases come across, what to pass through, what to absorb, what strategy to employ in these decisions. And so it's a really interesting time. And I think so, if it doesn't kill us, it's really going to be an interesting time to weather this storm. So yeah, I think there's a lot. I guess the other point too that comes to mind is I think with this current COVID environment, we've been forced to look at travel an entirely different way. How do we engage with our supply partners? I think that we've started to learn by peer trial by fire as can we survive without getting on a plane and going to see everybody? And I think the answer in a lot of cases is we've done better than we thought we could. The answer certainly isn't abandon that strategy altogether, but it's how do we operate in this type of environment to still be impactful, but also be as efficient as possible, and to not put as much onus on the employees who have to do that, either personally or risk for the types of things that we saw over the course of the past year and a half. So yeah, really exciting time, interesting time. And I think there's going to be a lot of things coming out of this period that's going to change supply chain forever.
Yeah, interesting time indeed. I mean, you have it all day at work, and then you go home and you still have it again, right? I had that. Right. My son just graduated and had to buy a car, right? And the inventory is so low right now on that. I'm trying to get my house painted, and it's way out there because they can't get the labor to hire workers to paint the house. So you get it everywhere these days. So with that said, let's pivot to Lou and Moise for a minute here. And when we think about increasing supply chain resilience, one of the key strategies is to anticipate and understand the impact a crisis could have well before it happens. So Lou or Moise, how often would you suggest that companies stress test their supply chains? How should they go about doing that, and what should they be looking for?
Well, I'll go ahead and comment a little bit, and then I'd like, obviously, for Moise to share his thoughts. I'd like to build a little bit off of what Anissa and Greg were sharing. So I would absolutely echo their experiences fit the clients that I've been working with, and the most successful have looked at this period as an opportunity to be creative and innovative. Those that have tried to continue to look at this and say, we're going to try to, bang our head against the wall and do what we've always done. Those are the ones that, Greg, I smiled when you said, if this doesn't kill us, right? those are the ones that are dying. I mean, they just can't do it. They're frustrated. They're the ones. That's why we're seeing all the M&A activity. Candidly, obviously it's spurred by impending tax changes and whatnot. But they're the ones that are very quickly talking to the investment bankers, saying, "We're out. Let's go to market and let's be done, and we'll be part of a roll up." But the clients that really want to take this on, they are looking at their supply chains as, part of their strategic opportunity. And, when I look at this area, I really think it needs to be on a rotational basis and on a risk-oriented basis. And I'm not sure that, many of my clients pre this situation viewed it that way. They would have high risk area based on purchase volume and on logistic timing, but that's it. They didn't really consider things like the chip impact. And, we had Fukushima, we've had, other things that have come along that have had disruptions depending on where you are in what industry cycle, but not to the extent that we experienced here. Going forward, we're preaching with our clients that we need to view the supply chain in a different risk category than they've been considering it before, and that it needs to really be multidisciplinary. And that's, if there's one message that I want to really hammer home today, it's the multidisciplinary approach to supply chain. Having business strategy at the table, having the folks that are actually looking at M&A and growth activity for your business at the table with supply chain about where are we going corporate wise? Should this be something that we're trying to insource, into our business as we're going forward? What about ERP and engineering and manufacturability? Where are we? Are we making the right decisions going forward? So that impacts how often we should stress test our supply chain. Let me stop there. I could go on a lot longer. I know Moise has much better things to say than I do.
Thanks.
Moise, please go forward.
Yeah, thanks so much. I fully agree with everything you said. I'll just add that, what we're seeing is that companies, many that have been impacted severely by COVID-19 and other factors like trade issues and so forth, are realizing that the stress testing should be happening almost regularly, almost on a daily basis. And how do they get to that point is really about setting up a system or processes in place. So many companies are looking at, okay, can I identify some of these changes that are then, leading to supply chain disruptions earlier, right? And that goes back to what Chandra mentioned before about data analytics and some of those kinds of tools that can be used to say, okay, here are the triggers. Can I get ahead of these, instead of being reactionary? Can I see these earlier and be prepared for those kinds of things? But at the same time, it's also a matter of having, like I said, a whole process in place from identification to what happens next, right? And a part of that is looking at the value chain of the business. So supply chain is one part of that, but you look at the entire business and how the company provides value. Like, how do you produce products? Who are your customers? Why do your customers purchase your products and services versus somebody else? And then looking at these disruptions in the context of how do they impact the value chain along the various elements of that value chain, and then quantifying what the potential impact could be, right? There's some things like COVID, which obviously I don't think anybody really predicted that it would happen, but there are other things that are, at this point well known, that there will be trade wars, there will be reactions by governments, there will be tax changes and labor issues and all kinds of those kinds of things that we're all used to seeing. But you can kind of see, okay, what is the impact of any of those things along my value chain on my business, and then you can prioritize in terms of reaction. What are the items that I want to prioritize and have a path in place to react to? So that understanding of that value chain is a very critical component of all of this. And as far as what you should be testing for, I think that's really driven by your business, right? What are the key parts of the business in terms of customers, what you produce, your services? For many, it's going to be labor issues, labor costs, and so forth. That's really a main driver of how, what you should be stress testing. So I think that's something I've seen a lot. The companies are investing upfront is that can I step back and set up a process for all of this and to figure out, okay, what is that value chain? What is impacted? What is the cost? And then formulate a strategy for where I'm going to put my efforts and my resources in terms of responses.
Okay, thank you. Anissa,
Chris,
let's
can I just, I'm sorry, can I just add one thing real
Yeah,
quick,
please,
Chris? I
please.
think for the group, for the participants, you know, one of the things I see, unfortunately, in this area is too much falls on the purchasing arm in this area without cross-functional responsibility. So I'd be interested as we go forward what others are seeing in their organizations, and you especially in your practice area. But please go ahead. But that's what I observe, and it concerns me that we don't have enough cross-functional responsibility. So when these things fail, everybody looks to purchasing to solve it. So, anyways, just a
Yeah,
thought.
that's been my experience, I would say, leading up to, I would say, the last 6 to 8 months. And what I'm seeing, and it's predominantly my space is high tech, say Fortune 100. What I'm seeing is the creation of these new roles, these COEs that are focusing on agility, risk, and resilience. And they are not part of the procurement or purchasing organization. They report directly to the chief supply chain officer. But I had not seen that until, I would say, I started seeing that happen 8 months ago. So let's come back to Anissa, and you know, if you talk a little bit about what you consider some of the hallmark factors of a resilient supply chain.
Sure. So obviously people play a big factor in that, but I know we're going to be talking about cultural later, so I'll put that to the side for right now. But it really is developing and building really strong partnerships. It has to be a win-win. You know, our customers and us as a customer really need to realize that if we have it already, this is the time to build that strong partnership, because nickel and diming your suppliers becomes very toxic. And nowadays you have suppliers that will fire you. So it's not always, you know, the control is with the customer. So coming to that realization and being able to be more resilient because of partnerships is key. So I would say that would be first for us. During the pandemic and even pre-pandemic, we were locking down processes, you know, work instructions, procedures, standards of operations, and we, you know, everything from the shop floor to management, every process that we've had, we've locked down. And I think that because we started it pre-COVID, we kind of just took that that project on during COVID, and being able to implement that and understanding where your cost is, where the gaps are, where cross-training opportunities come into place is extremely, you know, beneficial for everyone, for the employees and the employer. And we were able to do that on the production end because of our efforts, again, pre-COVID with our IIoT. And just echoing what the gentleman said before me, you know, it's about, you know, making sure that your processes are locked down. It's making sure that you're doing business and you're more strategic and you're not just putting out fires, being proactive. So because we started that, you know, before, you know, the pandemic, we've reaped the benefits of that. You know, it was an investment. It was about being innovative. You know, in one end, we want to standardize. We've been beating up the drum of standardization, whether it be tooling, training, you know, machines, equipment, everything. And so having that in place, but then also looking for opportunities for innovation. And IIoT provided that because we get to see where the trends are, where the inconsistencies are, and we use those as talking points with our team. And that has been extremely beneficial. So I think that what we were doing pre-COVID really helped us during COVID, and now we're reaping the benefits of that today. Now that we're busy, we can take on at minimum 30% more business today than we could have pre-COVID because of the things that we were able to lock down. But it does take time, and you're taking your management team, you're taking the people that are making money for you, you know, away from their day-to-day responsibilities and investing in the future. So for a small machine shop like mine, a lot of companies won't do it. And I'm here to tell everyone that there is great benefit from it.
Yeah. Anissa, have there been some things that the pandemic made you do that you would expect to outlast the pandemic?
Well, going back to what Greg said, that's something that, we've done here and there for conference calls, but at the same, never what it is today. And I think people are becoming more comfortable. So I think that in itself, like my safety, not having to, travel all the way to the West Coast or East Coast to visit our customers, not because we don't want to, but because our customers want to do it this way, is, reduces our costs. And also I think that what manufacturing touches lives. If you're a manufacturer and you've been in this industry for more than a couple of months, you'll feel it. You'll likely catch the bug, I say. And so during the pandemic, it's proven that manufacturers do save lives and impact, making parts for ventilators and biotech equipment. That in itself, aftermath of that, it really connects. It's not about just airplanes. It's about literally these parts off your machine, and you got to make it right. So I think that instilling that in the team, I couldn't have done it without the pandemic, and I think that's gonna really last.
Excellent, thank you. Greg, let's come back
to you. Did I answer your question?
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much. I mean, that's one of the things that, not that I've enjoyed the pandemic at all, but there's things that I've been made to do during the pandemic that forced me to rethink some things that I probably wouldn't have if it wasn't for the circumstances. And they've been good things that I expect to outlast the pandemic as well. I get excited about that stuff. So Greg, let's come back to you. There's a wide continuum of how companies apply technology in their supply chains, ranging from Excel spreadsheets to APIs and beyond to artificial intelligence. What do you think accounts for this variation in digital maturity, and what role can it play in supply chain resilience?
It's a great question, Chris, and I think it's one that I'm interested to hear feedback from others as well. I can give you my own, I guess, perception on this, and a lot of it has to do with perception. I think there's a lot of perceptions around what does it take to become more digitally relevant, more digitally advanced, and I think there's a perception of a significant cost, huge amounts of resources. If you think about your own supply base, if you're in a business of high mix, low volume, and you've got a lot of smaller partners out there, will they be able to adopt and adapt to what's required to be able to engage more digitally? And I think these are all perceptions that might be floating around. I think it's been around long enough now, and it's been advancing at a rate that it's less of a cutting edge thing and now more of an imperative. And so I think that that's something that we're starting to see. And because of that, there's more examples out there. There's more examples of the benefit of these types of programs. You can point to things as you do your own internal sales to management. And I think that's critical because you need to make sure that every level of the business is bought in and committed. It can't just be supply chain saying we need to do this because it's going to help us. It's got to be truly something that's built into your DNA as a company and adopt it. And so in order to do that, you need to be able to bring forward the very clear quantifiable examples of the benefits that it brings to the table, what it's going to cost, but then when that's going to get paid back, whether in efficiency and dollars, et cetera. And so, it's not an easy question. And we have, I think we have opportunity to continue to grow in this phase. We're not at the end of the continuum by any stretch of the imagination. I think a lot of the hesitation to moving forward was just out of, ease. It's easy to use the tools, and, I think that it's having to go through and having the appetite at all levels of the organization to take this on and consider it. And so I think, there is the ongoing challenge, and I think getting through those perceptions is critical. So, but I am interested to hear what others have to say as you've gone through the transformation or as you have it.
Yeah, so for any of the panelists, for companies finding themselves far behind on the digital front, needing to catch up, any thoughts on how to accelerate digital transformation?
Well, I would suggest Chandra is a great resource. So I'm not getting paid a plug fee, but I think there are definitely, you know, doing these kinds of webinars is one of the ways to be able to show the available resources that we have in the community. I think smaller suppliers just don't even understand what there is out in the community, especially if they're domestic suppliers. I mean, I'm focusing on our domestic supply chain, obviously. You know, there are programs there to help support them. And so, you know, I view it as a responsibility as just a business person to make people aware of resources that are out there that, you know, that are available to them. So I would start there, and encourage people to do that. I think that, you know, that we also have public-private partnerships that are available through, you know, community college programs and whatnot as well. So, I mean, I'll stop for others to chime in, but those are for smaller companies that it signifies.
So from a smaller company, I would agree with Lou. Back in 2012, I was kicking and screaming, and I was one of those old manufacturers that refused to get out of my comfort zone and look into CNC. And today, 90% of my equipment is digital. And so it was because I lost 90% of my business. So I was either going to close my doors or go that path. But once you get a taste of it, it's almost addicting because you see the benefits and you see how, you know, it's a whole different ball game. And I believe that the best resources available to us, you know, again, plugging MXD, but also associations and getting out there, hearing what other people are doing. Because many times, even though I was old manufacturing, the processes that I had in place were good. And so it was just a matter of implementing them in the digital world. And also, you know, I would also stress, and I know this is not about, you know, Industry 4.0 or IoT, but it's very, very important that it's not presented as a big brother. You know, one of the things that the digital transformation for me, you know, monitoring machines, was everyone chuckled. They were like, there's no way you're going to be able to implement that. No one's going to accept it. Even one of my managers didn't think it was possible. But I didn't use it as a big brother. I used it as a carrot. I put in incentives in place, and I made sure that management and the engineers were on the shop floor supporting, you know, the production workers, whether it be buy better tooling or you know, better raw material. There are challenges that they were facing that wasn't coming to us. And then with the IIoT, we were able to hear them literally just looking for trends and inconsistencies. So if your intentions are that, you'll be able to implement it. If your intentions are to get more off your shop floor just because you have a monitor telling you an OEE, you're not, that's going to backfire. So it's really about the approach, and it's about getting the buy-in. But I'm proof that it is possible as a small manufacturer, that you can become successful and you can transform your company.
Thanks, Anissa. Moise, let's come back to you. What are some of the economic factors you're paying attention to assess supply chain health?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think that a lot of this is going to depend on the specific company, industry, et cetera, right? But I think for the most part, you know, what we've been monitoring very closely is labor issues. And this is even before the pandemic, right? Because we saw companies moving from one jurisdiction to another, driven, you know, mainly by changes in labor costs. You know, China was becoming more and more expensive. So companies were already looking at, you know, perhaps Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera. So that's something we kind of monitor very, very closely, is what is actually the labor cost happening in various jurisdictions, but also within the US, as I think Anissa mentioned about, you know, the tax incentives and so forth, and having a workforce that's actually willing to come back and work. But also, you know, we're looking very closely at the whole trade issue, right? I think we've seen over the last few years that many governments have become very inward looking, right? There was a trend towards globalization. That was the key word used for many years. And I think still is in many circles, but we saw some of that kind of fall off a bit, where many countries were saying, oh, well, let's look inward, right? America first, for example. But many other countries were doing the same. So as a result, they're putting in place these tariffs and, potential threats and so forth. So that's something we are monitoring very, very closely. I know that the Biden administration has proposals on supply chain side to encourage companies to bring some of that back into the US. So that's something we're looking at very, very closely. Of course, there are macroeconomic factors, which we always monitor, like interest rates, currency movements, and so forth, which are often a driver of which jurisdiction do you select, how do you transport, the logistics concerns, and so forth. So that's all the kind of stuff that we're looking at. I think the key difference between what we looked at before from economic perspective to today is now we're looking very closely at the connection between those various factors, right? So it's not just a supply chain is a linear process, and you look at, okay, this economic factor impacts my labor cost or my raw material cost, but then we kind of say, okay, well, does that impact 20 other things within the supply chain? And maybe it benefits some sides and hurts others. What is the net impact, right? So I think that's the big change that I think will even further accelerated because the whole tariff, trade war, and the pandemic is looking very closely at that connection between all of those various economic factors. So I think that's the main difference.
Okay, thank you, Moise. And for the audience members, we're going to be breaking for some audience Q&A in a few minutes here. There's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom panel there to start queuing up some of your messages. While we do that, let's jump back to Lou. Lou, what advice would you give to organizations that are seeking to make their supply chains more resilient in general, as opposed to just responding to the latest disruption?
Well, I love where Anissa went. So I was smiling and nodding my head enthusiastically because I'm a big believer in Industry 4.0 and where we're going in terms of, data accumulation and the use of predictive analytics and data to make wise decisions and recognize things that are coming. So, but I also believe in using that for incentive-based decisions. So I love where she went with what she did on the shop floor. My concern is that as you go up in size in organization, though, we start to have competing interests within an organization. So what I would suggest, and what I do work with clients on, is making sure that we don't have cross incentives. And so that's where earlier I was talking about making sure we have all the right parties at the table. And so that we're sure that we have bonus structures. And believe it or not, this becomes an HR issue. We have bonus and compensation structures and department goal setting appropriate to allow changes so that we rationalize what we're going to do internally versus through our supply chain appropriately. And that we can look at things like Moise was talking about, moving from globalization to regionalization. So, we're not going to buy everything from Asia on a basis and bring it here. We're going to start to break things down and look at our manufacturing footprint. We're also going to start to look at things and we're going to conceptualize maybe more on a not component basis, but on a subassembly basis. And again, that takes a change in how the organization may be incentivizing people. So to make your, you have to start with the idea that supply chain is inherently risk. It has an outside component to it that you do not control. So if you accept that, now, like Moise was saying, all those factors, let's bring all the parties to the table and redesign and incentivize people for the right behaviors. Chris, that's why I was glad to hear you say what you're starting to see in the space that you are active in. That's what we're preaching, where we want to see things go with organizations as a best practice. On a global basis, we feel that's a much healthier way to get the right bottom line results. Anissa's proven it. She's done it in her business because she's able to do it and be nimble and flexible. We got to be able to take that up in scale, though, in organizations where you can literally have internal competition. So that would be my answer here. That's what I would want to see to make, the supply chain more resilient. That is a best practice. That's going to take a lot of change from what we've done up till now going forward, and that will make us much better the next COVID type crisis that we face, because all oars will go in the right direction. We won't worry about our backyard because we'll be figuring out, we're all incentivized to do the right thing for the organization.
One quick follow-up question for you, Lou,
Sure.
before we jump to our audience Q&A. How much of resilience do you think is, I would say, universal or one size fits all versus how much really needs to be tailored to, say, your company size or the industry that you're in or the geography that you're in?
My personal belief from experiences, it needs to be, a majority of it needs to be tailored. And I'd say, there's some general concepts that are there, but let me just give you a couple of quick examples. So I do a decent amount in the medical device, aerospace, and automotive areas. Compare that to somebody who's in a cut and sew type operation where I can move my supply chain for, to save some money pretty quickly. But if I've got to, make sure that something meets FDA approval, or I got to make sure that I get a sign off for, a PPAP process for automotive, it's much more difficult to do that in my supply chain than it is I'm moving it from one cut and sew operation to another for my low cost labor. So I think you need to know the industry. You need to know what the cost drivers are. You need to know what the technical issues are. So you can have a conceptual amount, I'll throw a number at it. Is that maybe 35, 40% ish? But the rest of it's really got to be driven to that organization and then where that organization makes its money. I would put that in there as well, because how you make your money is going to be critical as well. That'd be my answer.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Lou. We've got a question in here. So from one of our audience members, let me read this. In the automotive environment, the CMB or co-managed buy method is very popular. The OEM tells you what supplier to buy raw material from and at what price. Are there any strategic recommendations to either go around this, say no CMB without losing business, or negotiate a CMB that brings some benefit to the tier one supplier? Any panelists have a perspective on this?
For me, I don't sell to automotive for that reason. I do parts for electrical vehicles and higher end automotive, but even when I lost, with all due respect to the automotive industry, it felt like I was a punching bag. And so I didn't want to be a punching bag. And I love the transparency end of it, and I want the partnership end of it, but the nickeling and diming was just not for me. And that's what after going to many shows and talking to many buyers, and doing many audits that I passed, when it came down to, cost structure and how much control they have, for us, it just wasn't good business. They had too much control. So I can't answer the question.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it kind of harkens back to what we discussed previously, the importance of more of a partnership and moving away from more of that transactional type relationship. And so I think there is a value in being able to evaluate what that is and put more value in the relationship and other aspects of what's important for both parties, above and beyond just the price element of it. And I think we see that as clear now as we ever have. And so when things become constrained, it certainly boils down to more than numbers on a paper as to who gets what focus and what support in times of crisis. So I think that's important.
I'll just quickly add, Chris, that we do national studies on metals and plastics with a lot of emphasis on automotive and transformation, profitability. And our results would show that unless you're best in class If you're in one of those programs, your profitability is going to lag because you are, you're an also ran basically. You have no profit hiding at that point. Candidly, I mean, I'm just speaking very directly. If you're best in class, then you're going to make it because you're absolutely the most efficient because they know a majority of your cost. So, I mean, you can go to our website to look at data that is out there for free on this. But if you're not best in class, it's a tough way to go. You need to have a handful or less competitors in your space. Otherwise, you aren't going to make significantly better money.
I mean, I think in terms of selection of suppliers, sometimes, I agree. It often or always comes down to price, but sometimes what we're seeing is there are other factors like sustainability. Are there other suppliers that meet some of these other increasingly important criteria, and potentially those are reasons to use somebody else. So that's something that could be pursued. Again, it's based on facts and circumstances, but ultimately, like I agree, price tends to be the most as expected, the point that's used to pick. But like I said, there are other factors that emerge that are becoming increasingly important.
Okay, thank you, guys. Here's a question on labor shortages. It's been hard for many companies to avoid these right now. What advice would you give to the audience on dealing with labor shortages? What works, what doesn't work? I could share a bit from my experience. Some of the most innovative things that I've seen work, right? Everyone had jacked up rates and everything to compete for talent and whatnot. But what I found to be the most sticky for an organization was they gave their employees their healthcare benefits without any premium, right? And what they were trying to do was attract a different type of employee, right? An employee who really values healthcare benefits and perhaps someone who's got a family to take care of, whatnot, and not someone who's going to come and go as unemployment bonuses are paid and whatnot. And that has worked very, very well for the organization. And they've been able to avoid what they would have had to offset otherwise with increased wages that were being demanded in their region. But any perspective on strategies from the panelists in terms of how to deal with the labor shortages?
I would also add outreach is part of our core values. And so we make an effort to promote the industry, not necessarily to get a pool of candidates, although we would reap the benefits, but more just for the industry and for the sake of the industry, and expose manufacturing to those that may have not considered it as a career choice. And those could be women, it could be younger or inner city. And so I think that what that does is, without, going political, but really diversifying your workforce is so important. It not only provides more perspectives and innovation, but it also opens up, makes people feel comfortable if they see people that look like them work for you on all levels. And so that's very important for us as a company, that everyone has a sense of belonging. And because of that, that has opened up doors for us to find people that wouldn't necessarily consider this as a career path. So I think if everyone does their part and takes it almost as a responsibility, I should say, takes it as a responsibility, not almost a responsibility, and is out there and preaching that manufacturing is not dirty, dark, and grimy, that there is innovation and it is clean and it's high tech. I think if we all do our part in doing that, and the government supports us in that and has some kind of a campaign like they had with Got Milk, maybe Got Manufacturing, something to really support us manufacturers so we can hire more people and have a bigger pool of a workforce.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the other panelists?
Chris, I would just say the clients I've seen to be most successful, it's a culture thing. A couple of things I've seen that I thought were pretty innovative. One is they do a high school signing day. I've got a client that just like signing for an athletic scholarship. They hold a signing ceremony for somebody who's going to join on at their company, with banners and, you know, taking the selfie pictures and inviting like the parents in, because it's a choice to go there versus maybe go off to college. And usually they do offer some kind of an educational benefit if that person wants to go on. The clients that I know that do something like that have had a great track record. And they also then, a number of my clients are doing apprenticeships through ICAT or others, and they've been quite successful. I will also tell you, though, that another thing I'm seeing is a lot of push towards automation. So that's where a lot of investment is going, which unfortunately follows against the policy that Anissa is talking about, which I find sad. But I would agree with everything that she said. That's where I want to see us go. But there is a lot of move to automation to take labor out, candidly, that my clients are moving towards.
Yeah, I see the same thing at very, very large scale, not just to address labor shortage, but to address the issues you have of protecting workers during a pandemic, right? You don't have to worry about robots getting infected, right? So was there another comment?
I have something to say to that. We also have apprenticeship programs and internship programs. So yes, 100% behind that, Lou. But as far as automation, I would say that automation replaces tasks, not people. If you have someone on your team and you're going into automation, at least for my team and the people that companies much bigger than I am, what they've been doing is they've been training them up to the next level, because manufacturing is growing. So that apprentice that joined the team is likely not going to want to do what a robot does. They would want to think outside the box. They would want to work with engineers, because innovation doesn't come from robots. And programming and things of that sort, and APQP meetings, and having that opportunity to hear someone's new ideas. There's all sorts of things and responsibilities and roles that we play in manufacture that's on a much higher scale than what a robot can do. So I don't have a robot. We are considering getting them, but the people that are on my shop floor that a robot might replace their tasks will not replace them, at least not for my company.
Great. Let's sneak one last question in here real fast. We had a question come in about resin suppliers and what to do when your resin supplier is asking for a price increase because they've received a price increase, right? And how to handle that, strategies for handling that. Any thoughts from the panelists?
Yeah, I think, from an overall approach, it applies to whether it's resin or metal or whatever the commodity might be you're purchasing. I think that there's your level of due diligence that's required to understand the validity of what they're asking. Right? Is it accurate? It's always obviously good practice to understand the financial stability of your partners and to see what is their position to be able to absorb these type of things. Obviously, if it's a large resin manufacturer, that's different than if it's a smaller partner. But if it's valid and it's a reality of the situation in the world today, I think it's something you need to consider and take forward. And I think it's something that you need to build into your overall business model as a reality of the world going forward. I think you can benchmark, you can see what other similar suppliers are doing to see if they are aligned as well from a benchmark perspective, because of course they have to remain competitive. But if that is in fact the case, then I think that there's few options beyond that. You want to make sure you retain a viable supply base, and I think that's something that's really critical.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, we're right at about time. Do we have any closing remarks from our hosts?
I mean, I guess I would just add, I think we hit on it a little bit, but tax is a key area in all of this as well. So I think whenever anybody's considering a change to the supply chain or restructuring, what we're seeing is that many governments are implementing taxes, basically an exit charge type of issue, saying if you move manufacturing out of our country, you owe us money. So there's a trend towards that globally, which I think we need to keep track of, just like, what is the actual cost of doing any kind of change? And I think tax is obviously playing a bigger and more of a role generally in that kind of decision making. The other thing I want to mention also is on the policy front. So I think a lot of these risks that we've been talking about from a supply chain perspective, there is a role, maybe an increasing role for government to play in terms of, think about cybersecurity, for example. For many companies, it's cost prohibitive to say, just me on a standalone basis to spend all this money on cybersecurity. But from a government perspective, maybe there's a much larger benefit overall if there was some kind of support. So I would encourage, the people to get involved with some of these policy groups and kind of be involved in conversations around that. Are there certain ways that the government could help facilitate some of these items and help mitigate some of the risks that may exist?
Okay, thank you, Moise. Okay, let me turn it back over to our host now, Chandra or Barry.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Thank you for a great panel. Unfortunately, Brad, the founder and CEO of Uptake, one of my co-chairs, is having some technical difficulties, so you get me for the close. But I just have to say, it's an honor to close this because that was a great discussion. And please help me, everyone, thank our incredible speakers. And, if you want, drop a line in the chat with kind of what was your best takeaway? Because I had a lot. As manufacturing leaders in Chicago, we're always looking to evolve like these solutions to these like really pressing supply chain challenges. As you've heard, we have to integrate technology and data at every turn. And we must be looking to a more diverse future workforce, or we're not going to get any of this done, right? So I think what struck me most about this conversation was really the honesty and the practical advice you just got. I think it's worth millions, and the diverse kind of perspectives that each panelist brought to this table, looking at it in their segment. So really, thank you to all of them. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's program. This does mark the final forum of the 2021 season. So I think we're ending on a very high note. And I really thank everyone so much for your support of the Executives Club. And boy, I tell you, we all look forward to seeing everyone again in person, hopefully very soon. So thank you all for your time, and you have a great rest of the day.